Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Let's Clear the Air. I am doing my best to fill the role of Adam Murray, who typically opens up these shows, but my name is Stuart Saulters. I am the Vice President of Federal Affairs for GPA Midstream. We are sad that Adam is not here, but Bryan is here, and we are looking forward to this conversation with Megan Jenkins from Pacific Legal Foundation. Megan, let's hop into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do for PLF, what PLF does. Give us some of the basics to start our conversation.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on, Stuart and Bryan. Really looking forward to our conversation. I lead the research team at Pacific Legal Foundation. And for those of you who haven't heard of us, PLF is a public interest law firm. That means that we sue the government on behalf of individuals when their rights are violated. And our goal is to set a lasting precedent that can protect everyone else. Really, we're fighting for freedom. We're fighting for the right of individuals in this space to use natural resources in a productive way. And we believe that freedom's really been restricted. So that's why we have a lot of work cut out for us.
No, that's great. So I guess maybe if you don't mind, share a little bit about how did you get to PLF? What did you do before? Are you a lawyer?
I'm not a lawyer, so I should say
Okay.
that right at the beginning. I have an economics background. And yeah, I first started down the path of environmental policy research way back when I was an undergraduate at Utah State University. And I would say I was really coming to research more from the political left. I love the environment. I love being outside. I love hiking. I live in northern Utah, so there's tons of opportunities to be outside, camping, uh, you name it. But up until I got a job as a student researcher, I had never really had the opportunity to dig in firsthand and look at these policies and evaluate them. And the first research project I ever worked on was looking at the Endangered Species Act and how it affected Trinity County, California. So, of course, this is a Northern California county that's very dependent on timber. And when the northern spotted owl was listed as endangered, of course, the law wasn't written to put the entire county out of business, but that's what ended up happening, right? And so as kind of a naive researcher, my eyes were open and I saw, you know, wow, these policies have a lot of unintended consequences. We need to evaluate them based on their actual outcomes, not based on their intentions, however lofty they may sound. That really started me on this path of studying economics. I've had the opportunity to work with really great researchers at the Mercatus Center at George Mason and do a fellowship there. And then I had the chance to help create a research center at Utah State that focused on environmental policy, on energy abundance, on all of these topics. And that kind of laid the groundwork for me to eventually join PLF. And at PLF, it's really fun to be a researcher in a world of lawyers because the research is getting used, right? It's applied right away. So that's something I love about the work that me and my team get to do is we're doing research that the lawyers then take and, use to inform their cases or to get new ideas for cases. And those cases really impact people's lives, right? There's a client behind everyone.
And there's definitely been a lot happening and a lot happening even at the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court. So if you're okay starting there, could you talk about some of what we've seen the Supreme Court decide, especially as it impacts both environmental policy and energy policy, and maybe what's one thing that's misunderstood or is kind of below the radar in terms of significant impacts to the world of environmental policy or the world of energy policy?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we've seen some really encouraging decisions come out of the Supreme Court in the last few years. One that PLF brought, a case called Sackett versus EPA in 2023, was decided. And I think that case was extremely important. This case dealt with the Clean Water Act. There was this couple, they wanted to build a single family home up in Idaho within an existing subdivision, right? And they went to start building. They had a consultant that said, hey, this is not wetlands. These are not, regulated waters. You should be fine. But unfortunately, the EPA got involved and made them halt their construction, threatened them with fines of $66,000 per day of violation. And it actually took them 10 years to even be able to bring the case in federal court, and PLF was involved all the way through. But finally, they won the right to bring their case in federal court, and then the in 2023, the Supreme Court sided with them and said, yes, this land is not water, right? And it's kind of a common sense finding, but I think it goes to show just how far some of these environmental laws have been stretched. The Clean Water Act is meant to regulate and prevent pollution in major waterways in the US. And yet, the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers have increasingly over the last few decades applied it to ditches and seasonal waters that are only there sometimes and really stretch this definition. And I think the biggest problem really was on the uncertainty it created, right? The chilling effect on investment, on people being able to build, and not just people, but energy investors, infrastructure projects, all of these projects that we desperately need in America. I think we're getting slowed down and stuck in this quagmire of uncertainty. So I think that was a really positive decision. I think what's misunderstood, going back to your question, is maybe the idea that, oh, the Supreme Court decided this and so problem solved. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? And PLF still has many cases in the pipeline, ensuring that federal agencies are actually adhering with the Supreme Court decision in Sackett. And in many cases, unfortunately, they're not. One example, we're defending a client named Dr. Zulfagari. She's a retired pediatrician in Florida and bought a 5-acre homestead, only to realize that the Army Corps of Engineers actually had assumed control of nearly half of her property, that her ability to just build a simple guest house was completely wiped out. And that's just one example. We don't even know how many countless other examples are out there of people trying to do a common sense thing and getting stuck, even though the Supreme Court has said, no, this is allowed, right?
So how does that work when somebody, has an issue with, the federal government, local government? Do they seek the PLF out, or do you guys kind of have an understanding of certain things going on with local, issues, or how does that work?
It's a great question. A little bit of both. So we're always out there looking for clients and trying to kind of market our services and say, hey, these are the things we work on. We're looking for clients. We don't charge our clients anything, right? We just want to represent you free of charge. But we also rely on relationships with folks like yourselves. A lot of it is networking, trying to understand like who is more connected to the on the ground issues and the people that are running into these barriers. Yeah.
Hmm, very interesting. So, well, you mentioned the Supreme Court case and how you would expect, a ruling to kind of set the, I guess, future tone of some of these overreaches, but you said it doesn't. So how do you how do regulators, when they make these laws, I mean, how do you strike the balance between what the law is intending to do and the greater public interest, and then also the overreach? I mean, it's probably really difficult to make a law that you're going to see into the future and try and figure out all the ways that this can happen. But I mean, is the courts the only way that really there's the ability to kind of keep that stuff in check?
It's a great question, and it's a difficult one, right? I think just human nature seeks out power and the expansion of that power, and it's going to push the limits. So I think that's why it's important that groups like PLF exist, is to constantly be holding government in check and holding it accountable. In addition to our amazing team of attorneys, we also have a legal policy team, and they are going out there and working with legislators, both at the federal and state level, to come to them with ideas of like, here's some model legislation that would, in this case of the Sackett case, we have a Waters of the State model bill. And our team is going around to state legislators and saying, hey, here's how you can keep regulation in check and make sure you're not unduly preventing beneficial development. So that's just one example. But I do think it's an eternal issue, Bryan, that there's always going to be work to be done in keeping government accountable.
That's why there's the PLF, right?
Exactly.
There's still plenty of work to be done. And I guess just curious your thoughts on what are the legal and regulatory challenges that exist today, and maybe what's the biggest one that we need to address. I know for the Let's Clear the Air audience, we've talked a lot about permitting reform. We've had quite a number of guests to talk about permitting reform and what they're doing within their organizations. Maybe permitting reform is the biggest challenge that PLF is working on or that we need to address.
Yeah, I think permitting reform is certainly a hot topic, and for good reason. It's been a theme of my research through my entire career, is looking at, what are all of the hoops someone has to jump through in order to do the thing they want to do. We did some recent research on mining, trying to understand what are the barriers to opening a new mine in the US. What would you have to do if you wanted to go through this process? And I'm sure you guys will not be surprised that it's extremely difficult. Um, in the US, it actually takes an average of 29 years to open a new mine, which the only country that takes longer than that is Zambia. I think is really interesting. And it's so important, right? Like we have all of these minerals in the US that are crucial to our economy, crucial to our advancements in innovation that are happening every day in electrification, in data centers, and AI. And our ability to access those technologies is really life improving. I think people forget about like the human effect. We can make human life so much better, but we're holding ourselves back. So I think permitting reform is a major barrier there standing in the way. Luckily, there is some hope. There's some bipartisan, at least recognition that this is a problem. One promising example is the SPEED Act. The SPEED Act would reform the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And NEPA, of course, was passed with the intention of saying, hey, if you're going to build a major project, you need to consider the environmental effects. But over the decades since it's been passed, it's become this choke point where many projects just never make it through at all. If they do, it may take years, decades even, to get the permit. And then once you get the permit, you may get stuck in litigation because all of these groups are able to intervene and say, we don't want this project to be built. So what the SPEED Act would do is it would reduce the statute of limitations, it would shorten it. It would also limit the ability of outside groups to sue and stop a project to those that are actually materially affected in some way, which I think would be a really beneficial change. You can't just say, I don't like this project, I don't want it to happen. You have to show that you're affected. And I think those would be really positive changes. The SPEED Act has passed the House. It's potentially stuck in the Senate. So that's where the political negotiations come in. Even if it doesn't pass this round, I think we are seeing more and more recognition across the aisle that this is a problem. I'm sure you're familiar with the abundance movement, right? This whole idea that like Ezra Klein has written his book on abundance and recognized that like we want government to get these outcomes. It's not getting these outcomes. So what's standing in the way? And he lays it all out in his book that often it's regulatory barriers to getting the things that we want out of government. So at least recognizing the problem, I think we're seeing a lot of agreement there that maybe we didn't see in the past.
So I was looking up some court cases from PLF, and it looks like you guys have a pretty good record of winning some of these things based on, the kind of general push to have permit reform and some of these court case decisions that are actually, limiting some of this overreach. Is there any lessons that energy companies can learn from this? I mean, is this something that we think, some of this burden is going to really be dropped in the future?
Yeah, I mean, my hope would be that energy companies in particular continue to innovate and push the boundaries of what's possible, because I think that's really where we get those benefits to human life, right? Is where we're coming up with potentially new sources of energy, or at least, better ways of using the energy sources we do have. I think energy is just the core component of human well-being. It underlies everything we do. My power went out last night. So when that happens, you remember like, oh my gosh, this is so limiting, right? And that's a silly example, but there are so many examples in medicine and in science and technology where our ability to have reliable, affordable energy is crucial to coming up with cures for our most challenging diseases or whatever it may be. The incubators that keep newborn babies alive in the hospital, all of these things that are actually crucial to human life. And I think people forget that it's not just what are the environmental impacts of this project, but it's actually what also, in addition to that question, we should be asking, what are the human costs? Like, what are we missing out on if we don't move forward with this new technology or this new energy that we could be accessing?
You're kind of, I feel like you're kind of talking about it, but maybe if you don't mind, explain a little bit about this abundance movement. I haven't read Ezra Klein's book. I admit, I'm more of a fiction guy, good or
Nice.
bad. I probably should read more nonfiction, unfortunately, but yeah, talk about this abundance movement and what is PLF doing in regards to this, and maybe what does PLF think industry should be doing in regards to this kind of abundance movement?
So the abundance movement, I mean, the ideas are old, but I think some of the buzzwords are new and some of the buzz is new. It comes from this idea that I think comes out of classical liberalism and libertarianism, the idea that freedom can lead to a better life for members of society. And abundance itself, I think of it as our ability to have more of the things that make life better at a lower cost. So more energy, more healthcare, more maybe water is an issue in some of the Western states where I live, in Utah, for example. So how could we create policies that expand our ability to access all these resources in a life improving way? And the acknowledgement that in a lot of cases, regulation is holding us back and creating this like artificial scarcity. So it's kind of like a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. So moving away from that scarcity mindset of like, how can we limit the negative and, you know, regulating out of fear, and instead thinking, what could be possible if we unleashed human innovation in greater ways? I mean, I think it goes all the way back to the founding of America, really, and the ideas that have made America so successful that if we just let creative, smart people come up with solutions, they will have ideas, you know, that any one person never could have come up with. But if we let them tackle those problems on their own, they will make their lives and those around them better. So, and then Ezra Klein, last year, he's a New York Times writer, of course, very well read, and he wrote a book called Abundance with Derek Thompson, and I do recommend it. I think it's really good. It's written for, I would say, a left to center audience, and I think that's really its accomplishment, as he is appealing to more liberal members of society and saying, look, for all of these years, we have enacted these rules to try and get a cleaner environment or cheaper housing or whatever it may be, but it's not working, right? These rules actually may be preventing us from getting a greater supply of housing that is so desperately needed or an expanded supply of energy. And maybe he focuses on clean energy, but I think the arguments can be applied to all types of energy. So I do think that is improving this bipartisan agreement that regulation is standing in the way of a better future.
Yeah, I've kind of found it fascinating. Just the last 20 years, I remember, climate change coming on the scene and just kind of the pessimistic outlook of all things, industry and human progression and all that stuff, and kind of the left of center push to, more restrictive policies and everything in the government. And now it seems to be kind of moving the other way. I don't know if that has anything to do with just technology advancement and AI, and everybody's kind of excited about the future things that we can do, but there does seem to be a lot more optimism towards us fixing the problems with our own invention and technology. Does in the book is there anything about energy policy, kind of natural resource development that's mentioned in there? Or do you see that being a kind of a central role to the abundance movement?
Absolutely, yes. Ezra Klein talks quite a bit about how permitting in particular is holding back the deployment of solar and wind power. And I think that's a very valid argument. As I said, I think it applies to every type of energy. One thing he doesn't discuss is the importance of nuclear, the importance of these technologies that can actually provide more of that baseload power that can be counted on throughout the day, regardless of weather and all of that. But yeah, and I think coming back to permitting, I think that's why permitting is so important. We saw President Trump, when he came into office, revoked some permits for these offshore wind farms. And I think that's really interesting because it's kind of political power coming in and picking winners and losers, which we saw the exact same thing with President Biden. When he was in power, he banned offshore drilling. And so I think that kind of ping pong back and forth is really not helpful to creating that abundant future, right? I think if we had rules that were clear, that applied to all industries equally, I think that would give investors more certainty about that they should invest and that they should try these big, bold ideas that could make human life better.
Where I am in Washington, D.C., tracking some of this conversation around permitting, there is a lot of conversation around certainty in permitting. And so that you're not kind of going with the winds of whoever's in the administration. There's kind of I'm going to get my permit and I know I'm going to have my permit until I get the project in place. And so that's a very, very important conversation that's happening. I guess, you talked a little bit about waters of the US and obviously there was a big decision with the Sackett case. But after that, you now have the EPA proposing a rulemaking to kind of ingrain the results of that Sackett case in law. So that's happening. Other things are happening. I guess what are the ongoing activities and maybe what's anything that has yet to happen but could happen that I guess folks in the midstream industry and the oil and gas industry should be watching?
Well, I think there's a lot of action going on in the states that sometimes flies under the radar, but I do think that's incredibly important, right? We have all these 50 states with their own rules and laws regarding energy, and PLF is certainly involved in those fights. We are representing, for example, John and Melinda Morgan, a brother and sister who inherited their family's mineral rights in Santa Barbara County, California. But a recent California law created these massive setbacks that say there actually can be no new oil drilling within 3,200 feet of any home, school, business, hospital, really like any structure of any kind. And that really made their mineral rights worth nothing overnight. So I think that's an example where we're challenging that law as unconstitutional. At the very least, if the state wants to completely wipe out the value of those mineral rights, they're going to have to compensate the property owner. And that's what PLF is fighting for. We're also looking at where we're representing clients in New York, right? New York has a fracking ban in place. And again, we have these clients, Thomas and Madison Woodward. It's a father and son. And they really carefully studied this property before purchasing it. They found that it, had a ton of potential for natural gas just across the border in Pennsylvania. There's this booming natural gas industry. But then when New York adopted, in this case, an executive order, uh, again, they lost their ability to use their property. And so that's where I think PLF's long history in property rights is really important. We're defending the right of individual people to use their property in the most productive way. And when states are stepping in and limiting that freedom, that's something that we're watching for, and we're looking to defend that freedom.
Yeah, I get angry enough just when my zoning laws prohibit me from building the things I want to do on my land. So, yeah,
Right?
yeah, the mineral rights would be a big deal. That would, yeah, that basically gets rid of the point of that. So, Megan, is there anything that oil and gas industry us should be paying attention to over the next few years? On you mentioned the Speed Act. I think everybody's hoping that one gets through. But anything else on the horizon, or anything that you see, just interesting court cases or stuff that you're working on?
There is so much going on and so much to pay attention to. I think one area where we could see meaningful reform would be with the Endangered Species Act. I'm doing some research there looking at the Endangered Species Act is supposed to be based on the best available science, and the data that we're examining shows that it's really not. In many cases, it's like a political decision being made about whether to list or delist a species. And there are some reforms that have been proposed. The ESA Amendments Act of 2025 would try to limit that discretion, that political discretion, and say, no, like if a species has recovered, if it has met objective criteria for recovery, then it must be delisted. We're seeing that right now with the grizzly bear. Even the current administration has chosen not to delist the grizzly bear. I think because it's such a political, it's just fraught with controversy to delist a species. But the goal of the Endangered Species Act is to get those species to the point where they can be delisted, right? And if we don't ever
Right.
have that kind of regulatory incentive of fewer restrictions, then I think we don't have as many incentives for people to help species recover in the first place. So I do think that would be a big area where we could see some improvements.
Yeah, I did see a court case where you guys had, I guess it was the bald eagle, got that. I thought that was pretty interesting.
There's often a lot of outcry when something is delisted that, oh my gosh, this is just a terrible thing. The species is going to be imperiled. But really, I think that's the goal, right? That's the goal, is that they recover to the point that they can be delisted. And so I think we should see that as a success.
Bryan, I got to email some of your colleagues. GPA is considering how to engage. The Fish and Wildlife Service just changed some of their rules around the definition of harm. And so that's one that we've been tracking as an association, trying to figure out, how we engage, because I think there will be litigation. I don't know, Megan, maybe you know more, but I think that's one where, to your point, the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, frankly has been weaponized and used against kind of infrastructure development. And to a certain degree, it's been a success, right? There's been cases where populations have grown, and we should applaud that, not use it against infrastructure development for sure.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
One of the questions we wanted to ask too was, and maybe the answer is the Endangered Species Act, but what is one thing that if you could change, you would change when it comes to regulations or the regulatory process?
If I had a magic wand, I would repeal NEPA. That would be my one choice. And I'll tell you why. NEPA is a procedural law. It's a process. It doesn't actually require any substantive environmental protections. And I think we have all these other laws that do that, like the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. We can debate how effective those laws are. But I think NEPA itself is just not getting us anything. It's just creating a lot of paperwork. It's creating a lot of delays. And the research I've read, it's really impossible for researchers to quantify any, marginal benefits from NEPA itself. If we took away NEPA and we just had these other laws, I think the environment would be fine. I think we would have these substantive protections in place, but we wouldn't have that immensely costly paperwork of NEPA, which people spend years in that process. They spend sometimes millions of dollars hiring consultants, working with the federal agencies. Uh, and then they may spend even more fighting a lawsuit. So that would be the one change I would make if I had a magic wand.
This has been very timely. I'm actually reviewing some comments. EPA is revising their NEPA regulations, so how EPA complies with NEPA. And so thank you. I appreciate that. If they repealed it, I wouldn't have to review those comments, but it's not repealed just yet. So I am reviewing those comments right now. But no, we appreciate the conversation. This has been very informative. I think for folks that are a part of the Let's Clear the Air audience, they now know what PLF is and what PLF does and some of the successes of PLF. So thank you for educating us on all the good work y'all are doing. So Adam, I didn't do it at the beginning. Adam usually has an icebreaker that's really fun and entertaining. I didn't have the icebreaker. Sorry about that. But he always closes the podcast by asking, if we have you back in 2 to 3 years, Megan, something has happened to make you happy. What would that something be?
Yeah, I like it. I think that's a fun question. I think if the momentum continues around permitting reform, if we're successful, we'll see energy prices fall. We'll see energy production within the US boosting significantly. I think we have immense resources that we're not fully able to take advantage of today. And I think people's lives will be better because of it. They'll be devoting less of their paycheck to energy costs. And hopefully energy will be something that honestly regular people just don't have to think about.
That would be nice.
No, that's definitely, I think that's the intention and the motivation of our members and pretty much all of industry. Is just like, hey, we have the technology to get the resource to where it needs to go. Let us do it, and we'll protect the environment. We'll protect the public in the process. So that's awesome. Well, Megan, thank you again for the time. Thank you for coming on Let's Clear the Air. And for folks out there, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see y'all again at the next episode.